A forested mountain park that plays home to ghosts, terrifying cryptids, and witch covens. An old military fort harboring the spirits of soldiers lost in brutal conflict. And a popular public garden plagued by paranormal activity tied to the graves it was constructed over. Await on this journey through some more of Alabama's most haunted places. Let's jump right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me for another chilling adventure through some more of Alabama's most haunted places. Recognized for its strong ties to US history, for its astounding nature expanses, agricultural prowess, unique culture, and more, the Yellowhammer State is also shrouded in a number of chilling ghost stories and old hill folklore sure to send shivers down your spine. Are you sure you're ready for this one? Our first haunt takes us to northern Alabama and on a hike through Monte Sano State Park. Monte Sano State Park, which is placed out of Huntsville, Alabama, is a massive 2,140-acre expanse toting what were originally known as life-saving waters and fresh nature capable of curing various ailments. That, in more recent times, has become hugely popular amongst nature enthusiasts, horseback riders, hunters, anglers, campers, and more, and its bounds have acted as a birthing place for some pretty spooky stories. Historically, people would begin frequenting Monte Sano lands circa the early 1800s, possibly even a bit earlier, as it was believed its natural purity in waters had healing effects not just on the body, but on the mind and soul. And its name was derived from Spanish origin, translating in English to mean mountain of health. At one point, the mountain actually toted a small town named Veduta, which no longer exists. And later, in 1877, the Hotel Monte Sano would open its doors, boasting 233 rooms, and later, its own railway which departed from Huntsville and ferried passengers on a breathtaking train ride through local forests and up to the top of the mountain. Notably, as the resort grew in popularity, it would welcome a handful of high-profile guests, including William H. Vanderbilt, Helen Keller, Jay Gould, and many, many more. Unfortunately for the hotel, however, financial difficulties would eventually result in it closing its doors in 1900, and it would be transformed into a private summer residence for a time, before being abandoned and ultimately crumbling to the ground. Through the early 1930s, the park's 2,140 acres were purchased under the state, and from 1935 through 1940, the Civilian Conservation Corps would build a number of trails, 11 rustic cabins, an amphitheater, and a lodge made of stone sourced right on the mountaintop. However, sadly, in 1948, the original lodge would burn to the ground, and was not fully reconstructed until 2002. In the present, Monte Sano State Park remains open to the public and offers opportunities for visitors with a wide range of interests. It also totes a good number of guided tours, events, and even concerts in its amphitheater. While it's unknown who or what haunts Monte Sano, those who have hiked, camped, or traveled through the area have reported shadowy figures that slink amongst the foliage, instances of vehicles stalling out and refusing to restart, and tales of ghostly lights spied through the trees after dark. From as early as the 1900s and onward, a surprising range of accounts have detailed run-ins with a host of cryptids, including with dogmen, chalkfee, which are pretty much demonic rabbits, and with the fabled white thing, which amounts to a large furry white hominid creature with glowing red eyes that's been known to get extremely aggressive with those who cross its path. Also reported across park bounds are phantom bootsteps heard through the brush, stories of witch covens that meet in its deepest reaches, and tales of ghoulish monstrosities that lurk near the old Japanese gardens. And several have told of the apparition of an elderly woman holding a kerosene lantern that gives off an ominous vibe that's felt by pretty much everyone who's encountered her. Our second haunt lands us on Dauphin Island and has us braving the historic Fort Gaines. Fort Gaines, which is located on the southern tip of Dauphin Island, right at the entrance to Mobile Bay, is a historic defensive construct turned popular landmark location on a spit of land that's now renowned for its family-friendly events, games, fishing, white sand beaches, and plentiful activities, and its weathered bounds have since earned an ominous reputation for purported ghostly activity. Historically, Fort Gaines, which derives its moniker from War of 1812 hero General Edward Pendleton Gaines, was first designed in 1818 as a way to choke potential threats attempting to enter the bay, and blueprints pinned it to be an identical copy of Fort Morgan. Unfortunately, Congress would cancel funding for the project, with construction put on halt in 1821, and said construction wouldn't start up again until much later through the 1850s. By the time Alabama was anticipating secession from the US, circa January of 1861, the old fort actually wasn't totally finished yet, and when federal funding was cut, Confederate engineers would finish the project over the next several years. For a duration through the war, Fort Gaines would remain under Confederate control until 1864, when it fell in the same federal assault that ended up in the sacking of Fort Morgan. Much like before, engineers would quickly repair the fort after the fighting had stopped. Following the war, while troops would leave Fort Gaines in masses, the site would remain an active military fort, and later, between 1901 and 1904, the Endicott Board would actually see 2 modern gun batteries installed across the defense. With the exception of greater firepower and the most basic of preservation efforts, and unlike other forts with future years of military use, Fort Gaines would receive no major upgrades. And as the years went on and military tech advanced, at a point it was acknowledged that its old guns were no longer effective against rapidly evolving air and sea warfare. At the end of World War I, the War Department would sell Gaines to the state, after which it would be reactivated only once during World War II, before being closed down again, returned to the state, and in 1955, being open to the public as a state park. Into the present, Fort Gaines remains open to the public, and is an awesome sight to see for anyone enjoying the relaxation and fun offered by its surrounding island. Not surprisingly, when considering its long history of service and participation in several large battles, the whole of Fort Gaines grounds are believed to play host to a number of restless spirits, and those who have braved exploring it have reported phantom bootsteps heard through empty areas, extreme cold spots felt on otherwise hot days, and the smells of tobacco smoke and cooking food without source. Ghostly gunshots, explosions, and the sounds of war are often detected on the winds, and a handful of spectral soldiers have been sighted in various places, most often atop the fort, scouting the horizons. Additionally, entire troops of soldiers have been spied marching within the fort and appear so solid that they are often mistaken for actors, before onlookers turn away for only a moment to find they've vanished into thin air. Lastly, medieval festivals are regularly held at Fort Gaines, and during one such festival, a participant who was staying in the bastion sighted a figure dressed in white with a black cape pass right by the window overlooking the gardens twice. At first, he believed this figure just another event attendee. The only problem was the window was way too high for anyone to pass by it. Our third haunt takes us just a short skip north of our last, and has us boarding the prestigious USS Alabama. The USS Alabama, or BB-60, which is now moored off the coast of Mobile, Alabama, is a retired historic battleship turned museum site that's bounds welcome countless visitors each year, and that's tied to a number of classic ghost stories and tales of supernatural activity across its decks. Historically, the Alabama, which was designed as a 35,000-ton South Dakota-class battleship, was constructed through the early 1940s out of the Norfolk Navy Yard in Portsmouth, Virginia, and was commissioned in 1942, after which she would operate stateside along the East Coast until early 1943. Subsequently, following this service, she would be restationed in the North Atlantic as a preventative measure against potential invasions by German heavy ships for a time, before in August of 1943 being transferred to the Pacific. A few months later, in November, BB-60 would engage in an operation to capture the Gilbert Islands, after which, in 1944, she would take part in the capture of the Marshalls, in the capture of the Marianas and Leyte, in the battles of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf, and in several lesser raids involving Japanese positions scattered across the Pacific. In 1945, the Alabama would rejoin her fleet for operations in the Western Pacific, and would participate in a series of raids against Japanese home islands, after which, from August through October of the same year, she would join other Allied forces in the occupation of Japan, and would embark on multiple voyages to return veterans to the US. Following the war, in January of 1947, the USS Alabama was decommissioned at the Puget Sound Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington, and for the next 15 years would remain technically in service, but would ultimately see no action until she was stricken from the Naval Vessel Register in June of 1962. 2 years later, in 1964, the Navy would turn BB-60 over to the state of Alabama, and the state would choose to moor her in Mobile, while officiating the old vessel as a memorial to those who sacrificed everything through the war. More recently, in 1986, the Alabama was designated a National Historic Landmark, and over the years, she would be utilized not only as a museum, but also as a set in various high-profile film productions. In the present, PB-60 remains open to the public, offering a wealth of displays and educational materials while hosting various events each year. Considering its long service history complete with numerous deaths on board, the fact that at one point a turret malfunction resulted in 8 friendly kills, and hell, even that 2 workmen were killed when the vessel was originally constructed, it's believed the spirits of all those whose lives were taken by the Alabama remain tied to it, and both staff and visitors have reported hearing phantom footsteps through empty hallways, disembodied voices from vacant rooms, and have even cited several full-bodied apparitions donning old military garb that manifest in the officers' quarters and cook's galley. After dark, several watchmen have told of strange tapping and scratching noises around the bulkhead, of solid steel hatches that shut by themselves, and of the constant feeling of being closely watched by someone or something unseen. And several paranormal investigations of the vessel have yielded high EMF levels, even when everything is shut down, and hits on both thermal grids and spirit boxes. Also reported across PB-60 are instances of objects moving around on their own, of extreme cold patches that follow tour groups around, and of odd malfunctions with both cameras and cellular devices, while others have claimed to hear the phantom sounds of war and gunfire, or even see visions of battles long since past. Easily the most famous story surrounding the Alabama has to do with one spirit in particular that, when considering its actions, have led some to theorize may have belonged to a thief who operated on board for a time. Incidentally, this presence has been known to take personal possessions in under impossible timeframes, and one more high-profile account details a woman who was walking past the sleeping quarters when both of her earrings were snatched straight from her ears and whisked off to who knows where. Number 4 takes us to the heart of Alabama and has us exploring the Alabama State Capitol building. The Alabama State Capitol, which is placed in Montgomery, is a historic building in the long-standing center of government for the state that's bounds, over their many years, have played witness to a number of significant U.S. events, and that also boasts ties to some of the capital city's most prolific tales of chilling paranormal activity. Historically, predating our current capital, for years, Cahaba and Tuscaloosa would hold centers of Alabama government. However, in 1846, Montgomery would be selected as a permanent capital, and work on its first capitol building was started later the same year, after which it would be completed and presented to the state by December of 1847. Unfortunately, however, just 2 years following, in 1849, this first capitol would burn to the ground in a fire. Over the next year, planning for a new capitol, being our current building, was started under architect Barachius Holt, while rubble from the previous one was cleared from its lot, and from 1850 through 51, the new capitol was constructed atop the very same brick foundation that the prior capitol had once stood upon. Subsequently, the site's grand opening would occur on October 1st of 1851, during which time its halls would be occupied by both chambers of the Alabama legislature and a crowd of excited civilians. Through the onset of the Civil War, Alabama, alongside 6 other Deep South states, would secede from the Union through February of 1861, and the Alabama Capitol would be considered the first Capitol building utilized by the Confederacy. Incidentally, when Jefferson Davis took his oath of office as the only president of the Confederate States of America, he would do so right on this Capitol building's front step. Following the war, for years, Alabama legislature would falter under a confused and resilient populace, and in 1901, delegates would meet to draft a new Alabama state constitution, one which would allow white supremacy by law, while stripping political power from counties and towns, and centralizing it to the capital alone. Ultimately, this constitution would welcome the profound and violent effects of protected racism for the years to come. Through the 1950s and early 60s, a series of protests and rallies for civil rights would be held at or right near the old Capitol, including one that saw Martin Luther King Jr., and things would hit a boiling point in 1963, when then Governor George C. Wallace flew the Confederate battle flag in a statement of defiance to the federal government, on the very day he was to meet with Robert F. Kennedy, who was acting Attorney General at the time. This Confederate battle flag would be flown for almost 30 more years. In 1988, several African American legislators and members of the state chapter of the NAACP were arrested after they attempted to remove the flag. And finally, in 1991, the flag was removed during renovations and was permanently barred from making a comeback by a 1993 court decision. In the present, the Alabama State Capitol remains the center of governance to the state and offers a host of historic rooms, materials, and displays for those who wish to tour it. Chillingly, over its long existence, the capital has also boasted an ominous reputation due to a high number of reports of ghostly activity experienced both by state officials and visitors, and those who have braved its bounds tell of doors that open and close on their own, of voices heard through its historic chambers that are no longer in use, and of the commonly detected sounds of voices rallying together on the front step that are likely tied to the spirits of the many who protested there once. One more popular story tells of a ghostly blonde in antebellum-era clothing that's been sighted walking around and peering from various windows. Standing theories as to her origin range a bit, but the most popular one guesses her as the wife or love of someone who left a war and was killed in action, which resulted in her spirit lingering in the place that she was supposed to meet him after the war. This ghostly woman has been known to make people aware of her presence with the soft whooshing of her dress, and while she's always described as having a striking figure, most tales of encounters with her have witnesses painting her as faceless. Another popular capital tale tells of Will Oakley and his stepfather, P.A. Woods. By 1912, a land feud that had been boiling between the two hit its peak when a property suit was filed, after which P.A. Woods would travel to the capital to meet his stepson, Oakley, at his office there. During their meeting, however, Oakley became enraged, pulled 2 pistols, and shot Woods dead, before rushing himself down the street into the jail, turning himself in, and facing life in prison. Incidentally, in the men's washroom, many have felt a cold chill, and watched in horror as the faucets have twisted on by themselves. It's believed this phenomena is the ghost of Oakley, swinging into the restrooms to scrub the blood from his hands. Saving the scariest for last, our 5th and final haunt lands us in Alabama's largest city, and has us taking a walk through the Birmingham Botanical Gardens. The Birmingham Botanical Gardens, which are located where else but in Birmingham, atop Red Mountain, is a sprawling, lush expanse that totes various trails, structures, greenhouses, water features, and so much more. That's deceptively beautiful and serene setting has long harbored its fair share of classic ghost stories and tales of the unknown. Historically, the gardens trace their roots back to the turn of the 1960s, and through the dreams of former Mayor James W. Morgan, who sought to build a lavish garden that the public could enjoy. Despite repeated objections from the city's Park and Rec Board, Morgan pushed forward and purchased 69 acres of land just east of the Birmingham Zoo, after which he would take trips to other gardens, most notably to the Montreal Botanical Gardens, to find inspiration for his project. Upon his return to Birmingham, James would meet with curator Henry E. Tusher, who he would partner with during the official design process, and with a budget of only $150,000, the men set to work on a layout featuring strategically placed and low-cost structures, followed by a complete overhaul of the landscape's flora. The first building to be erected within the gardens was that of its conservatory, which would open its doors to the public in 1962, and over the next couple years, a handful of additional structures and areas were added, such as the site's iconic 7.4-acre Japanese garden and tea house. In 1966, one William R.J. Dunn would be officiated as park president, and would also go on to be its longest-running leader. And through the remainder of the 60s and 70s, due to its rapid gains in popularity, the expanse would grow even further, and would continue to add in new buildings, installations, areas, and features. Chillingly, through this same era, while construction workers were clearing future garden lands, no less than 3 unknown graves were discovered. Today, the Birmingham Botanical Gardens remain open to the public, and are constantly working with the city to promote education and knowledge regarding plants, gardens, and the environment as a whole. The site offers full membership packages complete with classes such as photography, gardening, and yoga. And while tours are usually available, they're currently on hiatus until maybe next year, as garden officials design a new, upgraded tour. Spanning beneath the nearby Birmingham Zoo and surrounding landscape, it's now known a pauper cemetery was once held and was covered up by the new development, and it's estimated that this burying ground hosted around 4,700 interments. Up to a point, it was believed these graves were only associated with zoo lands, but the uncovering of the aforementioned graves during garden development has caused speculation that the yard may have spanned much further than previously believed. Now, it's told that the restless spirits of the many who were laid to rest locally wander the gardens after dark, and both staff and visitors have reported a host of supernatural happenings, such as strange fogs that descend upon the property alone, ghostly knocking sounds heard from beneath the earth, and instances of flashlights with full batteries going dead right in the middle of night watch, leaving their holders blind and in the darkness with whatever else might lurk about. Informal investigations of the yard have yielded high EMF levels, snippets of a range of voices caught in EVP recordings, and hits on both spirit boxes and Ouija boards, while others have told of encounters with tall, lanky hominid beasts that hide in the trees and that have been known to drop down to chase lone walkers. One more famous story surrounding these botanical gardens is that of their ghostly gardener. As it's told, a number of visitors and staff members who have stayed late have cited an elderly man in a tattered gardener's uniform who tends the flora within the done formal rose garden that's believed to be the entity of a former gardener who once worked on site through its earliest years. Usually, this apparition is observed pruning flowers with old-fashioned shears, or watering certain plots for moments before fading away, and incredibly, several accounts detail the flowers he's tending discovered in perfect bloom the next day, even through off-seasons. Also reported through the gardens are extreme cold spots felt in the heat of summer, instances of doors on various buildings opening and closing on their own, and several stories of an overwhelming scent of lavender perfume detected near the herb garden, even when lavender isn't in bloom. Additionally, when this perfume is smelled, some have told of feeling a ghostly touch on their arms, often accompanied by a soft, feminine whisper. Lastly, in the Japanese garden, the barefoot spirit of a woman in a white gown has been sighted frolicking gracefully around. Near the glass houses, some have told of the disembodied sounds of a child heard crying, and throughout the conservatory, a tall dark figure in a brimmed hat has been spied lurking through the foliage, and has been known to disappear when approached or acknowledged. Thanks for joining me in exploring some more of Alabama's most haunted places. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you think could use a good scare. I'll see you all next time, and stay spooky.